it was one of those things that started off really well. So I was super passionate. The ground was running really, really quickly. I was using all my contacts. It was super enjoyable. What happened over a period of time was the lines got very, very blurred. I was working 7 days a week because of the global nature of the business. I was bending when I should have really been saying, right, it's 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. That's the end. It would be, I would take calls at 1 o'clock in the morning with factories in China and all sorts of things. And it became that I slowly started to almost cheat on my own values. And because I wanted it to be so successful. And since then, I've really unpacked why this happened to me. And it was because my identity was, I am a cheerleader. I am cheerleading. This is who I am. So for me to be successful, this had to be successful. But what was happening as a result of me chasing and making sure that this was successful was I lost myself in the process, the real who I am.
Rebecca, how are we doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Just looking at the first batch of snowfall on a nice blue sky day, which is probably the last I'll see of that until 2023. So moving swiftly on, so I don't cry my Scottish tears. Do you want to just talk us through your background in terms of your career, your entrepreneurial journey? Just set the scene in terms of the journey you've been on in the sort of past 10, 15 years that have really set you up for who you are today.
Yeah, so I'm Rebecca Hollis. I'm actually right now the head, the chief growth officer for Score app. I also work with Team England cheerleading amongst other things. But my journey really started. I was sort of propelled into the world of entrepreneurship. I had family members that were kind of in that sort of arena, so I very, very quickly sort of grabbed onto that and started discovering the different sort of opportunities within that world. I then actually went into working with Saatchi and Saatchi. I was hired by them to do some work with their social digital media team. Really spent most of my corporate side of what I've done, of what I've actually been working on actually in that arena with Saatchi's. And then from there, I actually went on to work for a global cheerleading company, trying to follow my passion. And as a result, I actually ended up burning out from that job. And then now I work and do things that are more thoughtful entrepreneurship. I invest in people and businesses that are aligned with my values, and obviously as a result of that and that path that I took, the things that I'm doing now are a lot more aligned with my true values. So that's kind of a little bit nutshell really of what I've been up to.
Well, there's a lot to unpack along the way. I think the first question is something I'm very interested in, and is against the background I've not actually had this discussion within before, which is cheerleading. And you were a very competitive cheerleader. You were Team England. You're now obviously in that space again as a coach. But how much of your experience in competitive cheerleading do you think is translated into your career and your entrepreneurial journey?
A huge amount. So really, for anybody that has had a passion outside of work, particularly sport, particularly a team sport, I feel like a lot of who I am intrinsically, I started this when I was like 10 years old. Cheerleading wasn't a massive thing in the UK. So I was traveling all over the world with my team, and we were going to America and to Germany. And, we would train and train and train for this one moment to be on the floor. And I think it really, really taught me about leadership, about working in teams, about goal setting. It's had a huge impact on what I do, and really one of the reasons now why I'm so involved with Team England and our national cheerleading team now, which by the way is exceptional. They're amazing now from what I did 20 plus years ago. But it's had a massive impact. The skills that I've learned from sport and from those days of working with a team, and when I look back on them, it's had a massive impact on what I do. And I really would urge anybody who are bringing up children to make sure that they are doing something that's outside of school, outside of play, that they are working towards a goal, because it's hugely beneficial for how you set them up in the future.
Do you think that needs to be sport? Do you think it can be a creative outlet? And second to that, how important do you think it is that there's a team sport or a community element to it rather than a solo pursuit? Because I know how much I've gained from my years as a rugby player growing up. I know how much my brothers gained from playing cricket growing up, and I do often wonder how different would I be as a person had I been a competitive fisherman, for example, in a very solo driven sport. What are the things that you've noticed in your corporate and entrepreneurial career thus far that sort of unpack that a little bit? Because I'm always so fascinated to know why people are the way they are in the jobs that they do. And I often notice a link from those that have played a high level of sport in the past versus their output versus their teamwork, leadership, all the things that you've mentioned.
It's funny that you say that about the difference between a team sport, and I can really only talk about sport because that's kind of been, and I think it probably makes sense for really any, like you said, any creative outlet. But looking at sport, we have athletes now that come from, say, gymnasts. So gymnastics can be a very, very, solo sport. You're in the gym, you're working on your own personal skills. They actually come into the fold of cheerleading and really, really enjoy it. They really enjoy that, I think that shared camaraderie, like you said, that community feel, that community aspect. They're still able to do the skills, because there's a lot of gymnastics in cheerleading. They're still able to execute on the skills that they've been working on. But what appeals to them the most is this camaraderie, is this working as a team, is this, the slight pressure off, we're in it together type of thing. So I have seen that. I've seen that is something that people like. I do think it's a personality thing, but I have experienced people coming into cheerleading from other disciplines and have found that the team sport element is so important. And you can imagine having a group of, say, 25 people, and you're traveling to different countries, you're sharing experiences, you are sharing the highs, but you're also sharing the lows as well. And so it's something that you do take with you for the rest of your life. I believe that I am just a cheerleader by nature. In my business and how we work now, I am known as the cheerleader. I'm known as the one that is uplifting, who is positive, who is happy to be the leader, who's happy to put thoughts forward, who is really always rallying the team. So there has definitely been a massive impact from that period of time into what I do now and into the work that I've done. And actually, I've noticed that the environments that I've been in that haven't been really conducive to who I am and where I'm going, I have been the least successful at. So it's really important to identify that in yourself, to be able to say, I am this person, this is what my core values are, this is what aligns, and then being able to apply that to something that you do that is more meaningful. So when I, take on work, or I decide to invest in a company or whatever it might be, I am always doing that with that in mind. Is this conducive to who I am as a person and where I'm going as well?
So what's interesting is that you're a cheerleader by nature, which I think rings true based on the CV to this point, because your first big role where burnout really started to become a topic of conversation after your time in digital marketing, social marketing with Saatchi & Saatchi, was with a cheerleading business, wasn't it? So you entered, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it was a cheerleading business that was essentially bringing it more into the UK from a US market, wasn't it? And that's where your passion became a career. And this is a conundrum I often find myself in, because when you're following something that you're passionate about, it's easy to blur the lines in terms of the boundaries of what's enjoyment, what's work, where should we switch off, where should we devote our time, where do we make gaps for certain things that actually aren't within the realm of passion or business. And I feel like you, like I have, experienced some of the challenges that come with that. So do you want to just talk us through how things changed when cheerleading didn't become a hobby, a focus outside of work, and actually became the work itself?
Yeah, so my motivation at the time, so I had a steady job. I had a steady career with a respectable company, and my motivation for actually moving over to cheerleading was I felt the corporate environment. I am an entrepreneur. I colour outside of the lines. I don't see red tape, which isn't great when you work for such a big company like that. So, you know, I was feeling squashed. I was feeling that I wasn't really being my best self. And I also don't feel I was doing the best work by this point. And I think I felt frustrated that I was working incredibly long hours and, you know, I was earning good money, but I wasn't seeing my home. I wasn't really spending enough time with my family. And it just felt like a really natural progression then to go, right, you know, you've got this under your belt, you know, you're towards your sort of late 20s, early 30s. This is a really good time to take all that you've learned and actually take a bit of a leap of faith, because really I had been sort of working my way up, and it had been a very natural progression up until this point. So this was kind of my big, right, what do I care about? What am I passionate about? And cheerleading was just that tick box. You know, that is my thing. That's what I love. That's what I care about and what I'm passionate about. And at the time I didn't really think like, how is that actually going to affect my life if it didn't work out? When you're sort of, I suppose like me, when you just think, well, I'm going to go for it, you know, you don't really think about those things, you know, got very, very tunnel vision. I actually approached this company and said that there's a massive opportunity in the UK and Europe. And I actually flew out to the US to present to them. And I actually created the role for myself. So I was like the head of UK and Ireland for a $1 billion company. And it was one of those things that started off really well. So I was super passionate. The ground was running really, really quickly. You know, I was using all my contacts. It was super enjoyable. I was incredibly relatable to everybody. But what happened over a period of time was the lines got very, very blurred. I was working 7 days a week because of the global nature of the business. I was bending when I should have really been saying, right, it's 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. That's the end. It would be, I would take calls at 1 o'clock in the morning with factories in China and all sorts of things. And it became that I slowly started to almost cheat on my own values, and because I wanted it to be so successful. And since then, I've really unpacked why this happened to me. And it was because my identity was, I am a cheerleader. I am cheerleading. This is who I am. So for me to be successful, this had to be successful. But what was happening as a result of me chasing and making sure that this was successful was I lost myself in the process. The real who I am, the real, you know, I am, that got lost in the process, and everything else became so much more important. And that is an unsustainable way to live. It doesn't matter how much you love something, someone, a cause, whatever it might be. If you are not the number one, if you are not living at your highest values and aligning to what you truly care about, then it's all going to unpack and unfold and come crashing down. And that's exactly what happened to me. And because of, you know, the environment wasn't totally supportive, but a lot of it did have to do with me. I was the one that, you know, made my own bed. I was the one that allowed the situation to happen. I was the one that lost myself and didn't put strategies in place, that I was showing up every day as the best possible version of me. So that's really kind of how I went from the sort of the corporate safe job, took that leap of faith, and then I realized that my identity was then wrapped up in what I did and who I was. And if that wasn't successful, I wasn't successful. And that's how I think the burnout really came to be, because when it did all start to crumbling down, I was like, well, that's me. I'm unsuccessful. I didn't know who I was. You know, I kind of lost that massive part of my life, and I had to really go back to square one and say, what do I care about? Who do I care about? I had to sort of rebuild who I was in the process. Now, you know, I'm so happy this happened. I really am. You know, and it was incredibly painful, and I'm not diminishing what happened. But as a result of that, I have had exponential growth. And the years that have followed the burnout have been quite incredible. So I am, you know, however painful and harsh and awful it sounds, I'm truly blessed that it happened to me, because I feel I'm now a more thoughtful entrepreneur, I'm a more thoughtful leader, I'm a more thoughtful friend, colleague. So it has had an overall positive impact, but it's not something that you would ever wish to happen. You know, you've been through lots of things as well. And I think that these things, you've got to take the positives from them. But if you can avoid something like a burnout, you know, you absolutely must, because it can be quite catastrophic at the time, and took me a good couple of years, you know, really to sort of get the wheels turning again afterwards.
It's funny how you phrased all that, because I completely agree that I always hold myself back from saying I am fortunate that I attempted suicide and came out the other side, because as a sentence it just sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But at the end of the day, it has informed my understanding of happiness, my understanding of success, my understanding of myself, and gives me a much more clarified self-awareness when it comes to what's good for me, what's bad for me, how do I approach certain things, how do I consider certain things, what path am I on, and where do I see myself within the world, what are my values, all these big questions that can take us a lifetime to figure out. And I completely agree that you wouldn't wish it upon your worst enemy, but intrinsically it's something valuable because it informs who you are as a person. But it's very difficult to spot these things when you're the one in them, until it's got to a point where you're almost desperate to fix them. So that's how I mean, almost through a resilience as a man, my perception of myself when I was younger, my resilience to that conversation around mental health led me to the point that I was in. But I also just refused to acknowledge that I was even suffering in the first place, because it wasn't the done thing. And then all of a sudden I was so isolated, alone and desperate that I made the decision to attempt suicide. And as you've said, you were so intertwined with, I am a cheerleader, my success is intertwined with this, these are my values. When burnout started to appear, it wasn't too late, but it was a point where there were a lot of things you could have done beforehand, which we'll come on to obviously, that would have prevented you from getting there. So let's just focus on that middle part for the time being, because I think that's really where most people will gain the most from this conversation is how can we focus on prevention, not cure? Because you experienced burnout as a result of that laser focus, that tunnel vision, and you've come out the other side with some clear perception and perspective on it. So when did the symptoms start to show, and what were they?
Yeah, so you're totally right, and you know, everything that you've said, it's one of those things that, like, you don't know until you know. I believe that about everything. You know, you don't know what you don't know, and it's one of those things that creeps up on you slowly. There are hints of it, but because your mind is so consumed with everything else that you have to do, it's really hard to pinpoint it. And it's funny, I actually had a friend the other day who called me, was really overwhelmed, and I said, you are heading for a burnout, I can see the symptoms in you. But I would never have, and she couldn't see it, but I would never have been able to see that in myself at that moment of time. And I think the symptoms really, one of the things that I think my earliest thing is that I started getting brain fog. So I'm sharp. I'm a very sharp person. I really struggled to put emails together. I was really struggling on calls to make any sort of like sense or impact into things. You know, I'm a very creative ideas person, problem solver. I felt that started to take a bit of a hit. I felt one of the other things as well that I realized, and a friend mentioned, that all I could talk about was my job. Because I was only doing my job, and it really was it was the thing that was right at the front of my mind, that when I was speaking to friends, it was really all I had going. It was the only thing I had to talk about. And I think that's kind of worrying when you have, you know, we're very multifaceted people. There's lots of things going on in the world at all time. And when you are really, and this could be anything, you know, if you're in a toxic relationship and all you can talk about is that person, again, that is not a good thing. It's meant to be a part of your life, not the only part of your life. So one of the things that I think that it was the brain fog that was probably one of the biggest first signs. I thought that I was just tired. I thought that I was just overwhelmed with the work. And I think that if I was to be back in that situation again, I wouldn't, because obviously, like you said, I've put things in place now that I wouldn't. But I think having that overwhelm and then the actual brain fog and thinking I'm just too busy, that's all it is, that would be my number one that would be a red flag for me now. And I would probably look to go and maybe have some sort of talking therapy or something where I can go and express what's going on or how I feel with somebody else. But a lot of my symptoms did revolve around the brain fog, but I also started getting hair loss. So my hair was breaking. I looked a bit swollen because I wasn't investing in my health, which is one of my highest values, is my own personal mental and physical health. And I just looked different. I looked tired. And it was being like what you were saying, Fergus, it was like being disengaged from the world around you and from other people, and you start to retreat into yourself and not spending enough time with the people and in the people that you care about, and in situations that, like, for me, I wasn't going to the gym, and that's something that I truly love to do. That should have been a red warning flag. Why am I not doing that? What's the reason for this? And I think it's just being that all-encompassing, all consumed with what is actually going on. And the nice thing is about my friend, when she said, she called me up and said, I'm really overwhelmed, I'm having to take a mental health day. I said, I can see what's happening here. You are overwhelmed, you're not asking for help, from people around you feel like you can do everything yourself. There's a lot going on. You're not doing any personal well-being, that, you just identify that this is what's happening now, and you might need to go and talk to someone. And she did. And she was like, hopefully I've caught this in the right time, because she's also a mother. So, it's just one of those things about being able to identify it quickly enough that you are not falling down that rabbit hole. And like you said, it's really hard once you're falling to scramble your way back up, unfortunately.
It is. And I mean, I've experienced burnout since depression. And a question I'll put to you is how you would make the distinction between those two things, because a lot of the conversation we have in this podcast, a lot of the conversation had in organizations, in people's personal lives, is how do you spot the warning signs if somebody's struggling with their mental health? Are they slipping into a state of depression? Are they at risk to themselves? What do you view the nuances between depression and burnout as being? Because I view there to be a lot of crossover, but there to be some different mechanisms as to how the person's found themselves in that situation is where I view the distinction, which I'll explain once you've ran through it. But I'm very interested to hear your take. It'd be interesting
actually to hear what you think, because I haven't had clinical depression, so I don't. But I would imagine that what I went through at that time, there probably was a lot of crossover, so I do have a lot of empathy for people that have depression, because I know that my mental state and the chemicals in my body were reacting very, very similar to if I did have clinical depression. So I know that when you are going through those moments and those times, that there is a lot of overlap. And but I also I believe that there's a lot of the things within it, the preventative things within that can help both depression and both preventing burnout as well. Like, what has been your experience then between the two? Because this will be massively interesting for me.
So I view the actual response from a human perspective to be quite similar. Mm-hmm. However, I can only speak to the personality type that tends to lend themselves to burnout, put themselves at higher risk to burning out, because it tends to come from a place of ambition, drive, overstimulation, self-doubt, or not feeling like you're doing enough, asking whether you could have done things differently. These questions that come from a place of ambition and drive can often make us feel like we're never doing enough, like we can always be doing more, which brings up pressure. So I think that essentially burnout is a temporary state of depression that comes from essentially a blindness to how much pressure and intensity is being placed upon oneself. I think the difference in terms of depression in general terms is that people can find themselves feeling the same way, not through the same mechanism as burnout. So I think change in someone's life, loss, lack of fulfillment, a injury, a change of location, all the day-to-day stuff that goes on can cause somebody to feel like they're lacking that fulfillment. And I do think that from a human perspective, from a purely human perspective, to sort of go down Johann Hari's lost connection direction, obviously there's chemical depression, which is something I probably won't speak to within this category, but from a human point of view, I think a lack of fulfillment is what can lead to depression in the modern world. I think burnout creates a lack of fulfillment as a result of individual pressure, individual expectation, individual perception of responsibility and ambition. Whereas, more generally speaking, depression can come from a lack of fulfillment in people's day-to-day lives, which might be an ignorance to how valuable their Wednesday night five-a-side actually is. So when they stop going because they feel too busy, they actually miss out on that social connection, they miss out on that exercise, they miss out on X, Y, and Z. Because I think there's a lot of day-to-day things that people take for granted that actually massively influence their mental health, that can lead them towards a state of depression where the comfortable option, the convenient option in front of them is actually what is making them feel depressed or slip towards depression, and the scarier, more challenging, higher risk option is the one that might get them out of it. And that's where the challenge comes in, because then it's a sort of self-fulfilling circle where the pressure creates more intensity and the intensity creates more pressure, and then before you know it, you're actually really feeling like you're spiraling. And my depression purely came from a too black and white a definition of success, whereby if I hadn't done X, Y, and Z at the end of a day, even if I'd just done X and Y, I would have labelled myself a failure, and I wasn't doing enough. And that led me to depression, because it meant that I felt like I wasn't fulfilled, I wasn't working hard enough. And since then, I felt I have slipped into a state of burnout, which is very similar to a state of depression. But I think the beauty of burnout is that it's self-inflicted, which means we actually have a lot more power to fix it than we might give ourselves credit for. So I'm not sure if I've quite done that justice in terms of making the distinction, but I think burnout is more aggressively compounding the factors that can lead somebody to be depressed, but within the realm of what we can control. I think depression in general terms is contributed more to the things that we can't control, whereas I think burnout is generally down to certain personality types that can overwork themselves or exacerbate the things that they can control in their day-to-day lives. But the beauty of that means that we have more power than we might give ourselves credit for to bring ourselves back out of it, which leads quite nicely on to asking how you actually tackled burnout when you faced it. Because when your hair started falling out, when you felt that brain fog, which I can empathize with massively. I had this in summer of this year, where I just knew that I was really struggling, and I need to do my laundry. Oh, it's downstairs. Oh no, just that sort of why is such a simple task so demanding question going on. And I have a sort of clearer strategy on how I got out of it. But when you experience this for the first time, how did you react, and what did you do next?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love what you said. And I do think the good news, if they're, when it comes to burnout, like what you said, is if you are informed, I think that in the back of your mind, you can change it. Like you said, with depression and stuff like that, I think it is harder. But when it comes to a burnout, if you've been informed about what it is and you can see the signs, I do think you have a bit more power, like what you were saying. So having these conversations like we are now, that could help somebody go, I identify that in myself, I'm going to do something about it. So I totally agree with you. And I wish I had that awareness at the time. I wish there was more people talking about it. I wish it was more of a thing, and I wish I had come across burnout. I just never thought it would happen to me. So I don't think I had that awareness at the time. But when it all sort of came to a head and I was like, I can't function at work, I can't do anything, and it came and it all fell apart, I did, with all great honesty, I feel like I went into a period of no man's land where I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Very much like when you have a breakup, or when someone, close to you passes away, and it's just kind of all like everything changes. Suddenly the rug is pulled from underneath you. And, Bruce Filler, his book, Life Quakes, it's a life quake. These are the big things that come in, that shake your world, that you aren't prepared for. And I went into this period of like real no man's land, and I did sit there for a while. I went on a brief trip to Thailand and tried to find myself, eat, pray, love. But it didn't work because I was in such a funk, and I wasn't quite right. The chemicals in my body were not quite right. So what slowly started to happen, one of the things that I slowly started doing was, okay, what can I do about this now? Like, who am I? What do I like? What do I value? And rather than saying I have to take action right now, this second, all I have to do is sit there and talk about who am I? What do I want? What do I like? What are my values? Who's important to me? Where do I like to spend time? What is it I like to do again? And so that was really the majority of the very beginning of what I did. That is one of the things that sort of started to get the wheels in motion, sort of got me out of that no man's land and into some sort of transition into the next phase of my life. And it did take a couple of years, and it did take me rearranging actually everything in my life, because when that happens, it has such an impact on everything and everyone around you, that it does give you an opportunity in a strange roundabout way to sort of reevaluate and realign yourself with who you truly are. So I spent the next couple of years really immersing myself in my own personal development. It just became the anchor to everything that I did. And because I had, rather than having the burnout and going, okay, I need to figure out what it is I want now, and I need to do something, I need to, find a job, and I need to, get a hobby, I literally just allowed myself that time. And that was one of the best things that I did, rather than, because I'd been put so much pressure on myself. To take that pressure off was liberating. It was totally liberating. And it gave me, my mind, that chance to really regain some clarity and to flourish again. So I spent years throwing myself into personal development. And I started to put into place strategies that meant that I was not going to fall back into what happened before, because that was hugely important to me. In those first couple of years, I was so frightened of doing the same thing again, or the same thing happening to me. So I needed to make sure that I was so steadfast in what I was going to be doing. So some of the things that I really did and that I've carried with me now is making sure that I know what my values are. So knowing exactly what do I care about. Like for me, like my top values are my personal development is one of my highest of values. If I'm not growing, I know I am not moving forward. It's super important to me. My health, my mental and physical health, super important to me, how I look after myself. Friends and family equally as well, really, really important. But making sure that you know exactly what you care about deepest, because if you know what your highest values are, you are going to be able to make decisions based on those values. If you are not aligned to what your values are and you're making decisions based on the environment that you're in, or something that's kind of stimulating at that moment in time, but you don't really align it to your values, you can go off on a tangent. So I'm now very, very steeped in my values. It is the basis really for my relationships with other people. If they do not align with my values, my business relationships with people, the people that I work with now, particularly at Score App, we are super aligned. I love these people. They are great individuals, and we are sharing the same goal professionally, but we also share very, very similar values, which makes us a successful team, a successful performing team, because we're all heading in the same direction, both personally and professionally as well, and making sure that, so you've got those values. So that was one of like the biggest things. And then knowing really what I wanted, like what did I really want to do? Because it wasn't, when I looked at it, it wasn't that I wanted to run the biggest cheerleading company and I wanted to, you know, do this. I actually just wanted to give back to cheerleading. I wanted to just have my foot through the door because I loved it so much and it gave so much to me that I also wanted to give back to it. So, you know, like in that high achiever, I was like, well, I have to be this, you know, to be successful at it. But what I've done now is I now work voluntarily with Team England in my spare time. And I am still able to fulfill that part of me. You know, my goal is that I want to be able to give back to cheerleading and give back to the sport that gave me so much. That I'm able to now dip my toe in. But I've also got these other great things that I love to do as well. And it's not monopolizing my life. So instead of it sort of becoming something that I dreaded, I now love it again. Because you can imagine after the burnout, it was a little bit like, gosh, am I ever going to love cheer again? Which is kind of like crazy to think that now. But you do think that. So I had to make sure that the things that I was doing was really conducive to where I was going. Healthy morning and evening routines. You know, I don't cheat on myself now. You know, I've got a new partner, and it's really important to me that I stick to what I do. You know, most days I don't bend, I don't cheat on myself, because that is a very, very slippery slope to cheating on your values and not being fully aligned. And I think that's the same personally, professionally. It makes such a difference. And I also realized that a lot of your environment is a big part of what you do. So my environment now, I make sure that I'm only in environments that are going to help me fulfill my goals, that I'm going to be able to add value to, that there's this really nice two-way street. So that was something that I realized, that you need to make sure that you're in the right group, circle of friends, the right environment of people around you. But I really believe that it all goes back to your values and your goals, and being able to keep whatever you do and whatever you decide to do, it has to align.
From a clinical sense, burnout, depression or otherwise, interestingly, we've had Dr. Julie Smith on the podcast, and she really felt that the core of her experience in therapy and the message that she's really done such a fantastic job of shouting so loudly on every mainstream media platform is values first. Is that once you live more in line with the values that you carry with you as an individual, the happier, more successful, more fulfilled you will be.
Yeah.
However, it is difficult to actually discover your true values because society is telling you your values should be X, Y, and Z, and we spend so much of our life living in line with those that we've spent so much time not really knowing who we are or what we're doing. So you had to almost go in with a stethoscope and really understand what was going on after your experience. And you've covered some of it in terms of the strategies, really focusing on the values, but placing yourself back in the shoes of pre-burnout. How can those listening prevent burnout? What are the things that they can do on a day-to-day basis to set themselves up more for success? I know a lot of it you'll have just covered, but if there are any clear strategies that people can take away to look out for themselves a bit more, and more importantly, act upon these feelings, act upon these concerns, act upon the red flags, how do people set themselves up to not find themselves in a situation like you and I both have done, where we have to go all the way down to start working our way back up? How can we spend more time in the middle?
Back into no man's land, you know, and back up again. It's funny because now the strategy that I wish I had then, I use now. So it's really quite simple when I look at it now, and it seems a lot when you first start in sort of personal development and looking at these strategies that are going to help you be the best possible version of yourself. But once you start doing it, you really can't live without it. you know, you feel every sort of change or anything that you're doing that's sort of not aligned with that, and it brings you back in. So really the first sort of things that I would do or I wish I had done back then is investing in your own personal growth and personal development. It's a non-negotiable. It's just as important as investing in relationships with other people. You know, if you're going to have a fantastic relationship with a friend, you are going to call them up, you're going to make sure that they're okay, you're going to say happy birthday. They are going to be, you know, you don't have to necessarily be seeing them all the time. You don't have to have that like nervous attachment style, but you just have to be super present and super aware. You have to show that same love for yourself. So I make sure that I am always checking in with myself. How am I feeling today? And having that awareness of your feelings and what you're up to, rather than pushing it aside and not wanting to deal with it at that second before it gets really big. You know, I don't like to have what I would call negative feelings. Like when I was in that space of burnout, I was so negative, and it's just not my default setting. So I don't, even now when I sort of creep back into, you know, when you see something on the news, like you said, the world around us is just can be so full on, and it can almost infiltrate into your belief system in a way. So it's making sure that you have these like check-ins with yourself daily, but also I do a quarterly check-in where I will sit down and say, is this still what I want? Is this still where I'm going? Are these still the people that I'm aligned with? Is there something that maybe I could be doing? So having that sort of mental constant check-in with yourself will make the big stuff so much easier, and it won't allow for things to creep up too much. So I'll sit there and say, you know, am I doing what I need to be doing with my health and my fitness? Am I making sure that I'm a good friend and sister? Am I developing at work? Am I making sure that I am helping other people? So I'll just have this like mental checklist. It's something actually that I wrote down before, but I sort of know it enough now to sort of be sitting there saying, you know, is this really where I'm going? And also making sure that I have that morning and evening routine where switching off from social media, not having any digital time at all whatsoever. It's a big deal for me. You know, that hour before you go to bed, you're like marinating. So the last thing you want to do is have your screen on before you go to bed. Those are all things that over time, it's building blocks, right? So it might not make a massive difference to you if you start doing it tomorrow, but it's those building blocks. It's like, you know, when you go to the gym, going to the gym once isn't going to make a huge amount of difference. But if you are consistent with it, it will be the building blocks that will get you to the result that you actually need. So I have these like little spinning plates, I feel like all the time, that are the important things in my life that I'm making sure that I'm constantly checking in with, and knowing that we will have these life quakes. They are going to come. Like, we need to just know that that is going to happen. So we're not going to get to a space where nothing's ever going to go wrong, because they do happen. But having that strategy in place of, okay, I'm now in no man's land. What do I need to do now? Throw myself into personal development and self-care. That's what I need to do. So you don't need to actually take action. And I think that's the biggest thing now, where I'm a go-getter that's the cheerleader. I'm a go-getter. I'm this, I'm that. I don't need to always take action to be moving forward. I just need to be aware of what's going on, and then I can take action based on something that I've actually thought about that is aligned with where I'm going, inspired action, for want of a better word.
An example I always use to contextualize the point you've just made there in a sort of corporate setting is the Hamilton scale is a quantitative measure for depression in a clinical setting. There's 5 sections with questions in each that give you a total score at the end that labels you depressed or not depressed with of varying degrees. And what's fascinating is that SSRIs, antidepressants, on average can improve your score by 1, 2, 3 on average. Right. Whereas going from a completely sporadic sleeping pattern to a structured sleeping pattern can improve your score by up to 6 points. So it just goes to show how much of an impact these holistic changes, personal development, focus points can have if you commit to them. And whilst when we're feeling worn out, whilst we're feeling depressed, burnt out, it's very difficult to actually make a change for the positive.
Yes.
But that's why it's so important, whether you're feeling great or terrible, to have these anchors around your day-to-day existence, because it's a preventative measure. And whilst it might not feel day-to-day like it's having a huge impact, that's probably because it's having the impact that is desired, and that you're not feeling too worn down on a day-to-day basis. Which is ironic, because as human beings we want results. We want, this has earned me X amount of money, or this has done Y or Z. So it's a difficult thing to commit to, but once things become a habit, you stop thinking about them. So that's why I think people looking at themselves and their health and well-being more holistically is good. And I think it's where people need to be a bit more, or a bit less dogmatic about how they view things, where they need to be all in on X or Y. They can actually learn to find a balance that's suitable for them.
And it can be overwhelming,
I think that's where there's a lot of growth to be had.
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of things that people say, you need to do this, you need to do that. You know, even what I've just spoken about, there's a lot of things in there. And I think that really the first stage is just to be aware of it. Just notice it's there. Just notice that something's happening. And then you can listen to your own intuition and start those little building blocks. You don't need to do everything straight away. You know, sometimes when you are in a funk or there's a lot of things going on, you just need to have that awareness. So it's just something that I'm very aware of now, going through my everyday life, that, this felt funny, or I need to probably look at that. And it's just something then, like you said, you can catch it before it goes any further.
There's a reason we feel and react to things the way that we do, and the more that we can unpack and analyse those reasons, the better we'll understand ourselves and know what to do next. And that isn't necessarily saying we can't do X, Y, or Z because it's bad for us. Things can be bad for you or negative for you, but as long as you're aware of how they're bad or negative for you, you can work them in. Like, if I'm going to have a Domino's pizza, I know for the next 2 days my appetite's going to skyrocket. But if I have stuff in the house healthily, readily made and ready to go, then actually I won't need to reach for the stuff that's going to make me sort of bend the rules on the diet that I'm sticking to. So it's kind of how do you set the parameters up around... I mean, we're having this conversation on the 8th of December. It's silly season in the UK. People are very much in this headspace at the moment of, everything's fallen apart, I'll pick it up again in January. Whereas in reality, if you've got a Christmas party on Thursday... You can do what you always do, but don't be naive to the fact that on Friday you're going to feel terrible. You're going to work badly. You're probably going to feel like you haven't contributed much by the end of the day. So maybe don't go out again on the Friday night, or maybe take yourself out of the city on a Saturday so you can get some more time on your own. And it's kind of finding that balance without punishing yourself for everything. And I think it's looking at the way that we react to things is a very important takeaway for everyone. So one thing I want to touch upon before I've got one final question for you.
Oh God, I was only going to say, I think personal development in that sense doesn't, always have to be so negative. It's a great thing to do, and it adds so much value to your life. It's not just about creating like that, safety net when things go wrong. It's also about amplifying your life as well. It's also about finding those small pockets in your life that are amazing and making them even more amazing, and adding value and actually throwing your energy behind things that you truly care about. And that's just, and it all comes down to having an understanding what those things are and that awareness and those values. And it's a really amazing positive thing to do once you get it right. It's not as daunting as sometimes it can be when you are in the thick of something maybe that's not so great or negative, like a burnout. So
agreed. So we spoke briefly before we hit record on your recent hip replacement, which is an interesting angle to go on for those listening. I am sure you're thinking at this point, but nonetheless, there was a sort of clear analogy that we sort of discussed on it, which is that your reflection on the hip replacement was that you'd spent so much of your life living with the pain of having a hip that was compromised, essentially, and you now feel infinitely better having a hip that is not compromised, and it's opened things up to you in new ways. You can enjoy things more. And the example I sort of placed that within was relationships where people hang on for longer than they probably should because it's convenient, it's comfortable, it's the less scary thing to do, and people carry with them the fear and questioning of that situation, and actually hold themselves and the other person in that relationship from moving forwards or developing themselves in a positive sense. And I think that very much ties into the prevention rather than cure narrative that we've been discussing, because from your perspective, how much better off are you from having set up the structures around your hip replacement to be able to enjoy the other side than you were when you were just suffering through the pain of it?
It's you know, and I'm 37, so I appreciate that everyone's probably thinking, why have you had a hip replacement? But I was born with hip dysplasia, so I've always had a problem with my hips growing up. So I've done marathons, and I've done the 3 Peaks Challenge, and done cheerleading. So, you know, I've pushed it hard, but but it's one of those things that I had a bit of a realization during this process. So first lockdown 2020, I went on a charity walk and I felt my hips slightly go, and it sort of deteriorated. It'd gone from like having this very mild dull pain that I've had for years, which I didn't really know I had because I'd always lived with it, to it getting worse and worse and worse as the months creeped on. And I had this realization at the time that the pillars that I had put in place after the burnout really, really helped me with this period in my life where my mental health could have really gone downhill, because I wasn't able to go out running. I wasn't able to see the friends that I usually see because I was, you know, physically compromised. And I really, if I hadn't have had the right mindset about throwing myself into personal development, what other things do I have that I love? I could have really have taken a bit of a mental tumble. You know, it had a bit of a knock, but not the type of, you know, knock that it could have of someone of my age who was like, you know, everyone was walking right during lockdown, and I wasn't even able to get to the end of the road without limping. So it was a lot for me, who's really fit, and I value my health. So the second that the doctor said to me, you need a hip replacement, I went, let's go, you know, I'm ready. And he actually said he's never seen someone literally jump onto the operating table with such vigor and excitement. But I knew that once that was done, I was going to be on the road to recovery, right? I knew what a life quake looked like, and I knew what the other side looked like, and I was so excited for it.
So you could anticipate the negatives and the demand that was to come, which means the fear of the unknown wasn't there,
right? And it was funny because I know a lot of people who've said to me since, my doctor told me 2 years ago that I needed a hip replacement. I'm going, what are you doing? Like, why are you waiting? And I don't quite understand. But I feel that it's that work that I did on being able to face these things and being able to understand what your values are, and then taking those hard steps to be able to do it. Like you said, like, I know what my values are in a relationship. You know, I'm fully prepared to take these steps, and I would be fully prepared to change it. So because I have been through that process, and I do that continual work on myself. But, you know, once I had it done, it was amazing. It was transformational. And there are people I know that are still waiting, are still putting it off, and now have back problems, you know, now have knee problems. So, you know, that's such a, you know, even though that's a very physical thing, it shows what it does, the impact physically, what that is doing on their life. It happens to you mentally as well. You know, if you let something go, and you don't deal with it and you don't work on it, it's going to create all these other problems. And I have to say, it was a really amazing experience to have my hip replaced, because like you said, now I don't live in any pain. I know that I have like the bottle to get, you know, to just jump at something and get it done. And I just think it's kind of that, it just shows that I've got to that point in my life based on what happened to me, that I'm able to really leverage that time that I took to work on myself. And, you know, it's one of those, it's nice when something like that happens and you can sort of give yourself a bit of a pat on the back and a high kick now. So I can actually use my leg now.
I'll stick to the pat on the back, as I'm not quite sure I'm capable of a high kick at this stage of my life. But the lesson there really is confront and tackle problems head on. The longer you sit on them, the more problem they'll cause you further down the line. And that's something I've learned as an entrepreneur, as an individual, managing my own mental health, as an athlete, as a business owner, all these things. If there's a problem in front of you, your life will be easier if you get it resolved somehow. And getting it resolved might not be easy, but it'll be easier on the other side once the problem is resolved. So, final question is, at this stage in your life, I'm sure there's been many evolutions to this question, but what does success look like to you now?
Success now, to me, is being able to live in my true, authentic self, with the people that I love, in an environment that is conducive to where I'm going, and doing work that is purposeful, and being healthy. Those are really very basic needs, but they really are all we need. You know, my growth, that kind of thing is super important to me. So being able, if I am living out my values, then that is what success, that is, you know, success is happiness. So that is success to me. And because I've been focusing on those things, the effect that has had is I'm more successful in my professional career than I've ever been before. I'm happier in my career than I've ever been before. I work with amazing people. I hang around with amazing people, and I'm doing things that I jump out of bed every day and I'm so excited to do. And I've got a new hip now to jump out of bed with. So that's really what success looks like to me. I believe that we are always, like you said, an evolution. So things are always going to change, but I believe that those are the staples now for life and for happiness and success.
Fantastic. Lots of insights that we can all take away there. So thank you very much for sharing. Where is the best place for people to find out what you're up to, engage with what's going on, check out Score App, etc., etc.? Where would you like them to go?
Yeah, sure. So I am active on LinkedIn, so you can always come and follow me on LinkedIn, just Rebecca Hollis over there. And Score App, you can reach out to any of us at Score App. It's a fun team. It's a SaaS technology company, just a load of fun, really fun, great entrepreneurs all working together, working on quiz marketing, which should be a bit dull, but it's not. It's amazing. And we work with such great people. So connect with me on LinkedIn. It's the best place to message me and to sort of follow the journey. And I would love to connect with other people and be able to share in their experiences as well, because that's really what life is about.
Too right. Fantastic. Thank you very much again for your time, and look forward to speaking soon.
Thank you so much.